Beirut in the early 1990s was not a city. It was a living battlefield of secrets, a place where identities shifted daily and entire neighborhoods transformed from safe passage to hostile territory in the span of a single hour. Foreign intelligence agencies entered the city like divers entering deep water. Once inside, everything became distorted. Streets bent like illusions, faces blended into one another, and information traveled in fragmented whispers. In this shadow world, one man learned to move without leaving a trace. One man learned to vanish even while standing in plain sight. This man was Imad Mughniyeh, the figure who would later be described as the hardest target in the Middle East. Yet at this point, it was barely a name even to the agencies hunting him. Before we deep down into the story, tell me your country in the comments. It helps this channel grow and reach more people who want the truth behind real intelligence history. Now, let's begin. Long before Mossad realized the scale of the threat he posed, Mughniyeh understood the environment he operated in better than anyone. His early years in the southern suburbs of Beirut, an area defined by conflict, sudden shifts of power, and constant surveillance by rival militias, trained him in ways no intelligence academy could replicate. He absorbed the city organically, learning which streets carried information, which alleys carried danger, and which faces revealed the truth behind their silence. This instinctive mastery of territory, combined with his growing operational role, would later turn him into one of the most elusive figures modern intelligence has ever faced. The irony is that Mossad began the search already at a disadvantage. They had no reliable photograph, no verified voice sample, and no consistent description of his physical appearance. Their early files were a patchwork of rumors, contradictions, and outdated images that bore little resemblance to the man he had become. Every lead pointed to a different face, a different height, a different lifestyle. Some reports said he was tall. Others insisted he was short. One claimed he had a beard. Another said he was always clean-shaven. Mossad wasn't chasing a person. They were chasing a silhouette drawn in smoke. This was the first major failure. They underestimated how fast he evolved. In a region where many militants sought fame and visibility, Mughniyeh did the opposite. He erased himself. No television appearances, no public speeches, no identifiable photographs. Even senior figures who met him often described him differently. He changed walking style, changed clothing habits, used decoys, and modified his appearance with such subtlety that even people who worked near him couldn't confirm his identity with certainty. By the early 1990s, as the Lebanese conflict shifted and foreign agencies intensified their presence, Mughniyeh transitioned into a ghost. He traveled without patterns. He switched cars multiple times a week. He used informal communication channels that left no trace. He relied on human networks instead of technology, making it almost impossible for foreign intelligence to intercept or analyze his movements. His understanding of Beirut's human landscape, street vendors, taxi drivers, local watchers, neighborhood shopkeepers became one of his strongest shields. These people weren't agents, but they acted like early warning systems, alerting him whenever unfamiliar activity appeared near areas he frequented. This environment made Mossad's work nearly impossible. Every time they attempted to build a local network, it collapsed before producing anything useful. Every time they placed informants, those informants were neutralized or exposed. Every safe house they established was compromised within weeks, sometimes days. Their agents felt as though the city was breathing against them, an organism that rejected any foreign intrusion. But what truly crippled their efforts was not just local resistance. It was the misjudgment at the core of their strategy. Mossad hunted Mughniyeh with the mindset that he operated like typical regional commanders of the time, seeking influence, attention, or visibility. But he operated on a completely different philosophy: power through invisibility. While many leaders broadcast their presence to project authority, he erased his presence to preserve his operational advantage. This single difference meant Mossad was always 2 steps behind, chasing footprints that were never there. Throughout the early 1990s, they repeatedly launched surveillance operations in Beirut, attempted undercover entries, and even tried to infiltrate neighborhoods that were believed to be linked to him. But each attempt met the same fate. The environment closed in around them. Their movements were detected, their covers cracked, their intel turned stale before reaching decision-makers. It wasn't that they weren't capable, it was that they were fighting a structure built to suffocate outside interference. By the mid-1990s, the pattern was clear. Every new lead disappeared. Every possible sighting turned into a dead end. Every operation launched to track him dissolved into confusion. Mossad's internal reports, years later analyzed by researchers, revealed a painful truth. They were not just losing the hunt, they had never truly begun it. The man they were chasing had turned into a myth, a whisper, a shape without a face. And as the decade progressed, Mughniyeh's influence expanded, while Mossad's visibility inside Lebanon shrank. He grew more experienced, more cautious, and more deeply integrated into protective networks. He was no longer simply hard to catch. He was structurally insulated from being caught. By the time the 1990s came to a close, the conclusion was unavoidable. Mossad had lost the trail completely, not temporarily, not strategically, entirely. They were chasing a man who had already slipped beyond the reach of conventional intelligence. They were chasing a ghost who understood the shadows better than anyone. The more Mossad tried to close in, the more they realized an uncomfortable truth. They did not understand the man they were hunting, the city he moved through, or the psychological terrain of the conflict shaping him. Their early strategy relied on pattern recognition, predictable movements, repeated locations, habitual routines. But Mughniyeh was not a creature of pattern. He operated like a shifting current in a sea of contradictions. He embraced unpredictability, not as a tactic, but as a lifestyle. In Beirut during the 1990s, that made him nearly untouchable. Their initial intelligence maps showed clusters of neighborhoods, safe houses, and suspected meeting points linked to his network, but those clusters never aligned with reality. Sometimes Mossad agents would stake out a location for days believing he might appear, only to discover later that he had passed through that same area hours earlier using a route they thought was too risky to consider. Other times, they avoided areas marked as high-exposure zones, unaware that these were the very streets he used most frequently because no one expected him there. Every assumption they made was inverted by his behavior. Complicating the hunt further was the information ecosystem of Beirut itself. The city was layered, politically, socially, and geographically. Even in peacetime, it was a maze. In the 1990s, it was a labyrinth, alive with competing interests. Multiple factions controlled different districts, each with its own internal security networks that functioned independently. Mossad's presence, no matter how carefully concealed, produced ripples that were immediately noticed by local watchers. A single unfamiliar face in the wrong cafe could trigger subtle warnings across an entire community. Streets that seemed open would quietly close. Friendly contacts would suddenly disappear. Areas that had been safe for surveillance would turn hostile without explanation. Mughniyeh understood these shifts instinctively. He lived within them. He read them the way others read weather patterns. When he sensed an increased foreign presence in a district, he didn't panic. He simply redirected his movements so naturally that even those accompanying him sometimes failed to notice the change. His awareness of urban rhythm, traffic at certain hours, social patterns during specific days, the micro-behaviors of residents, allowed him to blend seamlessly into the city's pulse. Mossad, on the other hand, moved against that pulse, and that made them visible. Every attempt to map his support networks failed for the same reason. Mossad expected hierarchical structures with clear lines of command. Instead, they found fluid ecosystems built on trust, geography, shared experiences, and informal communication lines. These networks didn't use phones when couriers could carry messages. They didn't rely on meetings when a brief nod across a crowded street could communicate everything necessary. The absence of digital signatures, recorded communications, or predictable schedules made Mossad's technological advantages largely irrelevant. The few local informants they managed to recruit during this period often delivered information that turned out to be outdated or deliberately misleading. Some were double agents feeding false trails. Others lacked access to real operational details. The harsh reality was that Mughniyeh's inner circle was impenetrable. People who truly knew his movements were few, fiercely loyal, and deeply embedded in communities that distrusted foreign intelligence by default. Recruiting from such circles was not just difficult, it bordered on impossible. As months turned into years, frustration within Mossad grew. Files on Mughniyeh expanded but produced no clarity. Reports became thicker, but the picture inside them became thinner. Analysts struggled to distinguish fact from rumor, truth from embellishment. They gathered hundreds of fragments, yet none aligned into a coherent image. One internal review later described the pursuit as trying to assemble a portrait from broken mirrors, each reflecting a different shape of the same man. Meanwhile, Mughniyeh's operational discipline only intensified. By now, he traveled through Beirut using layers of deception that would be considered excessive for most commanders. He rotated vehicles constantly. Some borrowed, some rented, some repainted, and some that appeared so ordinary they blended into the city's background. He avoided any routine that could be charted. Even his apparent habits, such as visiting certain areas or meeting specific individuals, were often deliberate misdirections intended to test whether foreign surveillance was present. When he sensed even the faintest sign of an external hunt, his response was not to confront it, but to dissolve into the city, leaving Mossad agents watching empty streets. On more than one occasion, operations that had taken months to plan fell apart because he simply did not appear when expected. Not because he was warned, but because he had anticipated the logic being used against him. By the mid-1990s, Mossad realized something profoundly unsettling. Mughniyeh had turned Beirut into a defensive weapon. The city itself, the geography, the communities, the social networks, shielded him better than any physical barrier. Mossad's presence inside Lebanon diminished as operations became riskier and less fruitful. Each failure reinforced the perception that they were hunting a figure who existed one layer deeper than their intelligence could penetrate. Internally, some operatives began referring to him as the disappearing man, a figure who seemed to evaporate just when they believed they had found a trail. Others said he moved like a rumor, present in whispers, invisible in reality. Every nickname carried the same message: they could not get close. They were blinded not only by his skill, but by the environment that lifted him and swallowed them. In truth, the hunt for Mughniyeh during the 1990s was not a pursuit. It was an illusion. Mossad believed they were getting closer, but with every step forward, they were actually walking deeper into a web of confusion he had no need to design. The region itself had designed it for him. Despite all their technology, experience, and determination, they were not pursuing him as much as pursuing shadows cast by a conflict they never fully understood. And somewhere within that shadowed landscape, Mughniyeh continued moving quietly, invisibly, always 3 steps ahead of an enemy that had not yet realized it was not just losing, but lost from the very beginning. Beirut in the late 1990s was not a city where men like Imad Mughniyeh simply vanished. It was a place built for ghosts. Streets changed names depending on who controlled them. Militias operated parallel to the state, and the local intelligence landscape was a shifting maze of loyalties, betrayals, and manufactured illusions. For Mossad, this environment was both an intelligence goldmine and a trap. Every hotel lobby hummed with watchers. Every rooftop held an informant loyal to someone else. Every cafe had 2 conversations, the ones spoken aloud and the ones whispered under the table. And somewhere inside this chaos, Mughniyeh lived, moved, slept, met, and planned. yet never left a footprint clear enough for Mossad to follow. The decade had already become a silent race. Mossad pushed deeper into Beirut through covert safehouses, front companies, implanted assets inside media offices, taxi networks, and the growing sprawl of South Lebanese refugee districts. Every operation was designed with a single pressure point in mind. Catch a glimpse of the man Hezbollah called the Ghost. The CIA-Mossad partnership was still bruised from the fiasco of previous operations. Too many close calls, too many agents burned, too many assets suddenly vanishing or switching sides. Trust inside the Joint Task Force was fragile, and Mughniyeh knew it. He exploited every fracture he sensed. One misdirected rumor about a meeting in Dahi could move entire surveillance teams while he slipped quietly through another quarter entirely. He understood the mechanics of intelligence better than many who pursued him. What made him so elusive was not just his skill, but the strategic discipline surrounding him. Hezbollah security officers constructed layers of deception around Mughniyeh's daily existence. Convoys that departed with multiple identical cars, safe houses arranged like a rotating puzzle, coded messages disguised as humanitarian shipments, and a growing system of underground tunnels and service routes beneath certain neighborhoods. Even when Mossad did obtain a rare confirmed sighting by the time a strike team or drone could be positioned, the sighting had aged past reliability. The man was gone, or worse, never there at all. The intelligence often felt like watching a reflection on water, the moment one reached for it. It broke inside Mossad's nerve centers. Analysts began to realize something deeply unsettling. Mughniyeh was not just evading their operations. He was shaping them. He fed the rumor channels with exquisite precision, giving Mossad just enough information to chase phantoms, waste manpower, and burn resources. He made them feel close, deliberately, repeatedly. A taped voice on a monitored line, a fleeting silhouette on a rooftop camera, a vehicle associated with one of his deputies parked accidentally near a Hezbollah office. These were not missteps. They were breadcrumbs laid by a man who understood the psychology of pursuit. Each near catch left the Israelis convinced that the next operation would succeed, that the next piece of intel was finally the breakthrough. It never was. The frustration inside Israeli leadership grew into something darker: suspicion. Was there a leak? Was someone inside Mossad compromised? Or was Mughniyeh simply too good? Operations were suspended, rewritten, restructured. New technology was pushed into the field. New assets were recruited and discarded. The CIA provided additional satellite coverage, signals monitoring, and field officers trained for urban infiltration. Yet even with enhanced American support, Mossad found itself chasing shadows that dissolved the moment anyone got close enough to touch them. Beirut was not a battlefield. It was Mughniyeh's personal chessboard. And despite their global reach, Mossad was consistently 2 moves behind. Meanwhile, Mughniyeh continued building Hezbollah's networks with the confidence of a man who understood that every enemy, surveillance failure strengthened him twice over. He expanded relationships with Iranian handlers, deepened contact with foreign militant groups, and refined the very playbook of asymmetric warfare that would define the early 2000s. His myth grew, transforming from a feared operative into something more dangerous, a legend. And legends, Mossad knew, were harder to kill than men. The longer he survived, the more impossible the task seemed. Some in Tel Aviv even whispered the unthinkable, that they were no longer hunting a man but the idea of him. And ideas, especially in the Middle East, never die easily. By the end of the 1990s, Mossad stood before a bitter reality. After nearly a decade of relentless pursuit, millions of dollars invested, countless assets risked, and endless nights of analysis, Imad Mughniyeh remained untouched. The intel failures had accumulated like weight on the chest of the service. False leads, misread signals, informants turning up dead, and Beirut's fractured landscape closing tighter around its prize. Yet one final opportunity emerged, a moment so tempting that Mossad believed history had finally tilted in their favor. Satellite imagery, signals, intercepts, and human intelligence all pointed to a rumored meeting deep inside southern Beirut. High stakes, high value, and supposedly involving Mughniyeh himself. It was the breakthrough they had been starving for, but the moment Mossad prepared its most precise operation of the decade. Surveillance teams positioned, exit routes mapped, extraction assets ready. The picture began to blur. The so-called meeting location suddenly shifted. Mughniyeh's security ring tightened unusually. A convoy believed to be carrying him left at the wrong time, in the wrong direction, with the wrong personnel. Every sign suggested one of two possibilities. Either this was a rare window into his movements, or Mossad was walking directly into a deception designed to test their reach. And still, they chose to move forward. The weight of nearly a decade of failure demanded action. What followed was a slow collapse rather than a dramatic one. The operation began to unravel before it could even mature. A crucial asset disappeared from communication. A surveillance drone lost visual contact at a critical moment due to unexpected electronic interference. A field report came in contradicting earlier intel about the identities of those inside the building. And then, silence. The target zone emptied, movement ceased, and the man they believed was Mughniyeh simply evaporated once more. When Mossad analysts reviewed the data later, the truth became painfully clear. The meeting had been a decoy. The entire setup was a trap designed to reveal Mossad's methods, confirm their assets, and measure their urgency. Mughniyeh had not only avoided them, he had studied them. Inside Mossad headquarters. The failure hit harder than any previous operation. This wasn't just a missed opportunity. 'Twas the moment they understood the limits of intelligence dominance in the Middle East. A man without a country, without a public identity, without a fixed address, had outplayed one of the most capable intelligence agencies on the planet. Their pursuit had not weakened him. It had sharpened him. It hardened the myth around him. And as the 1990s closed, Mughniyeh stood taller, more protected, more influential than ever. The man they had chased for years would not die until 2008. Killed not in Beirut's chaos, but through a meticulously planned joint CI-Mossad operation in Damascus. A victory, yes, but one purchased with years of hard lessons, failed hunts, and operational scars. And that is the unresolved truth that defines Mossad's missed hunt for Imad Mughniyeh in the 1990s. It wasn't a failure of courage or capability. It was a clash between relentless intelligence, machinery, and a singular, disciplined, deeply embedded adversary who understood his battleground better than anyone else. The chase shaped Mossad's future strategies, reshaped American cooperation in counterterrorism, and forced intelligence agencies worldwide to confront a new reality in modern asymmetric warfare. The most dangerous men are not the loudest ones, but the invisible ones who know exactly how to stay hidden. The story of Mossad's decade-long hunt for Imad Mughniyeh is more than history. It's a masterclass in how intelligence can fail, how legends are born, and how one man can challenge the world's most powerful agencies through patience, discipline, and absolute control of his environment. It is a reminder that the smallest misread detail, the tiniest delay in action, or a single false lead can shape the fate of entire regions. And if this deep dive into the covert world of espionage kept you hooked, there is so much more still hidden in the shadows. If you want the full series, more Cold War-era misadventures, or deep dive episodes on intelligence failures the world never talks about, like, subscribe, and comment which operation you want next. Your engagement decides which classified secret we uncover next.